fantastic to see a room so full of people who are all enthusiastic about data and analytics and so on. But I don't think we are all here just for that, because there's much more to data. There's about what actually do we do with it, and what impact do they make, and how do we work with other people to help them to improve their lives, make an impact, and how do we convince decision makers to see the importance and the value of data. So I think we are here for all of that today. I hope I'm right. So I'm Gesche Schmid from the Local Government Association. We are working together. We partnered with Nesta on the important question of what's the value of data. And I just want to give a quick introduction for the day for today. So we have first a set of presentations, then a short break, and then a workshop, sort of discussions around the table where you can bring in your views about what you heard in the presentations, but also then what your experience is from local authorities. And we very much want to hear how we take this program forward. So let me start with this. I thought, well, what image do I put up? And we always talk about silos and data silos. So this time I thought about boxes. I think this is how we worked many years ago. We kept everything in a box. Every service area had their data in a box. They had it in a system. They didn't share it. They kept it to themselves. Oh no, you cannot hold this data, you cannot see it, there might be something wrong with it. So we nicely packaged it all up. But did it really have value then? It only had value for inside the box and not outside the box. So if we actually open up the box, suddenly there appear all these opportunities and the value of data actually increase. And I have been reflecting a little bit on that because I led on the Open Data Transparency Program in the LGA, working with local authorities and learning the lessons around it, suddenly realizing that open data was actually the start of something much bigger, or part of something much bigger, which is actually working outside of the box, thinking outside of the box, opening up government, opening up data, creating an open culture where we are sharing, working with others in open partnership, creating open standards, so we are all creating data which are consistent and can be shared. Open design, building architecture softwares which can be shared where other people can plug things in as well, so that we help the communities to be open as well. So I think the thing about data and analytics goes much further. It is thinking in that entire world of thinking outside of the box. And that's a message which we need to bring across as well. I think it's not only about the data and the technology, but it is much more. So we were starting to look at the value of data. So if we had the open data, what's the value of open data? And then in the LGA and with local authorities, we started to look much wider. What is the value of data? How can it be better used? And if we start with the data and we analyze them, we get to information. And if we link it to problems, we can get some insight about relationships. And if we apply it then, we get some value from the data. So that's the triangle which we are seeing now and what it can help us with solving problems, helping people. People might be able to start to help themselves to meet their needs. It helps the decision making, the data sharing. Digital services requires data. And a lot of work is now being done in the intervention and prevention side. What can we do before someone becomes an acute case, for example? So within the research and information team in the LGA, we have been looking how can we get a better understanding about the value of data. And it is how can we use the data to design services around user needs? Where does data help to engage and empower citizens to build their communities, for example, neighborhood planning? Where can it drive efficiencies in public service transformation? For example, where service is duplicated, Where can we see that they are duplicated and can we maybe move together? And this is about buildings, staff, how we do things, processes, and so on. A lot had been said in the past about promoting economic and social growth through the innovative use of data, and I just recently spoke to Bath, who have done a lot in the open data world, and they told me now that some of the startups have received quite a bit of money, so that helps the local economic growth because they start to employ people, and it takes off as a business in the area. And there are lots of countless other examples there as well, like Leeds and so on. And where it all started was really around the being transparent and publicly accountable. That's where the journey started in 2010, 2011. So going back to the triangle, the better data use, what is it? What are the components? And Tom will talk about that much more later on. A lot of it is about leadership, but it also is about data management, the architecture around data, the standards we have, skills, how do we apply the analytics, and information governance. Can we share data with another organization or not? What processes we have in place to protect or to enable the sharing of data? So within the LGA and the Research and Information team, we are part of a sector-led improvement program which is working with local authorities to pick up good practice and to help authorities to come along. And as part of the Better Use of Data program, we are looking at open data, data standards, governance, data analytics, data services and tools like LG Inform and LG Inform Plus, analysis and research and learning and support. Recently we developed some learning modules online for publishing data and using standards. So with all of this work that is going on, we wanted to get some help and better identify what the value actually is. And that's when we started to talk to Nesta. Or Nesta came, it was like almost a marriage. We came together and said, well, we have the same ideas. Let's work together in partnership. And that's how the whole work, which Tom will now present, actually comes about. So we are funding specific work around case studies into the value and the role of data in local government, because we wanted to get a better understanding where data actually makes a difference and what the components are. So I would like to pass over to Tom Symons from Nesta, who is leading on the research program, and he will introduce and give further information about it. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks very much. So as Gesche said, I'm Tom from Nesta, researcher leading on our local data wars program, which we're here to talk about today. And just before I kick off with the presentation, I'll just give a very quick introduction to Nesta for those that don't know us. So we are an independent charity committed to promoting innovation for public benefit. We have a number of different ways that we do this through our innovation lab, where we give out grants and provide practical support and advice. We have a policy and research team, which is where I work and where this research is mainly located, where we're interested in the kind of processes of innovation and how organizations can be more innovative, and also what government can do to support those processes. And we also have an impact investment team where we use some of our endowment to invest in programs or projects or organizations that combine financial and social value. And then finally, we have a skills team, which is kind of like a consultancy and training bit within Nesta, and they provide support, tools and training to organizations to help them improve their innovative capacity. So that's a little bit about Nesta, and this piece of work about all about how local government can use data began earlier on this year, and so we're currently at about the halfway stage. And what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about where the project came from, what we've been looking at, where we've got to so far, including some of the kind of preliminary findings of the various bits of research that we've done. And then to give you a little bit of flavour, I'll go into some details about the case studies. I'm really pleased that we've got 4 of the case studies that we've looked at here today in the room, who are going to talk to you in much more detail. So I won't go into huge amounts of detail about those myself, but we'll be able to give you a kind of overview of those. And then at the end, I'll just go through some of the questions that we'd really like to focus on when we get to the group discussion later on this afternoon. And I'll just talk through them very quickly so that people have them in their mind for when they're listening to the case study presentations in just a moment. So, as I said, we started this program about 6 months ago, and we had 4 main purposes. The first one really came from this kind of sense that we got from some of our previous research and conversations that we've been having, that data could be this incredibly powerful means of supporting transformation within local authorities, but that currently these things are quite difficult to do. There wasn't a widespread understanding of how this can happen, and we felt that there was a need to do some research that could look into this issue and try and kind of develop insight and learning that we could then share back with the sector to try and support people who are trying to use data for better purposes in local government. So the 4 main ambitions of the programme were to explore how better data use can help councils to cut costs and improve outcomes and drive efficiencies. We wanted to establish and articulate the critical success factors for better data use. We wanted to look at ways in which Nesta and government and other organisations might be able to use their resources or their networks or influence to help councils get more from their data. And finally, we wanted to create insights and tools which can be of practical assistance to local authorities looking to get more value from the data that they hold. The programme has got 3 main phases. As I said, we're about halfway through. So the first thing we did was a piece of preliminary research, which involved interviews, a literature review, and conversations with people both inside local government and people who are working in organisations related to data use in local government. And that was a piece of research we did really just to get a kind of a solid foundational understanding of how councils are currently working with data, the current emerging trends in terms of what they're doing, and some of the major difficulties, challenges that they face when doing that. And so we finished that piece of research. There's a kind of short report that's coming out on Friday, which summarises that process of research. And really, just to say that will be distributed to everyone here in this room, so everyone will get a copy of that. But the reason we did that research really was to set up the kind of secondary, much more in-depth phase of research, which was our case study. So over the past 2 or 3 months, we've been looking at 8 local authorities and how they've used data in different ways. And we're also bringing in some international case studies as well. So that's a piece of work that will take us up to September, and then towards the end of the year and into next year we will have kind of concluding research discussions, and then looking at putting together a final report and any of the kind of practical tools that we might be able to create on the basis of this research. I'm just going to talk quickly through some of the contents of the paper that's going to come out on Friday, and some of the findings that we had from that preliminary phase, because they help to set up kind of where we got to with the case studies and why the case studies are focused as they are. So one of the first things we did was to produce a taxonomy of local government data use. And what we wanted to do was to try and put together as comprehensive a picture as we can about the different sources of data available to local authorities, the different ways in which they can use data, so both in terms of the processes of getting data into a usable standard, from cleaning to standardization to linking, through to the kind of tools of analysis where we talk about different methods of analysis, so from descriptive statistics through to algorithms and data visualization. And then finally, applying those to specific circumstances that you may come up against in local authorities, so particular use cases and ways in which these tools of analysis can help you to realise value. And so we produced that taxonomy quite early on, and then looked at finding examples. And this table is just kind of a abridged version of the one that's in the final report. But what we wanted to do was set out some of the kind of thematic areas within which you can use data, the kind of examples of them being used, and then examples of places that have been doing that. So we have examples in this table, such as kind of using predictive analytics to try and avert issues arising in everything from children's services to kind of regulatory fire safety services. We look at the use of data in evaluating and testing what works, so the ways in which councils can collect data on services and performance to test whether particular interventions are working or not. And we also look at kind of optimization of resources through to some of the kind of back office processes such as detecting fraud and error. So that was kind of the second thing that we did with the research. There we go. We then looked at some of the kind of emerging trends in terms of how local authorities, both here and abroad, are using data. And we really identified 5 main ways in which councils are starting to incorporate data into their everyday use. And it's worth maybe just reflecting on the fact that with all of these things, we saw data being used to complement existing initiatives or existing services, rather than being used, rather than data being analysis being something isolated and in its own right. So we saw probably the main trend, I think, in terms of public service delivery was in predictive analytics, the use of algorithms, machine learning to try and understand the likelihood of future adverse events occurring. We looked at smart places, which we call smart places because it's not just cities who are doing this, but that's the combination of sensors, Internet of Things technologies, and data to improve the management of places. We looked at the role of and the kind of emergence of open data. We heard earlier that this kind of emerged from the transparency agenda maybe five to 10 years ago, but has really taken on a new life as a means of supporting local communities of developers and entrepreneurs to come up with products and services, digital products and services that can help both solve public and social problems and also create new business models and businesses, which are an important source of local economic growth. We looked at geospatial analysis, and we particularly looked at a lot of the work that the LGA has been leading on here to see the kind of value that can be created through geospatial data. And in fact, this looked like one of the areas in which the majority of councils have been making lots of progress over the last few years. And it's a really good example of where councils coming together, as they have done with the local property gazetteer, and using data to underpin lots of processes and services can drive real value. And then finally, we looked at the kind of emergence of data warehousing and its ability to provide integrated public services. So this is the combination of data sets from across local government and sometimes the wider public sector to kind of enable deeper population level analysis and to provide frontline professionals with a much more comprehensive picture of the people or the families with whom they might be working with. And then finally, we pulled out 7 of key success factors or things that local authorities could be doing to try and get more from their data. I'm sure these are things that you will be doing all or some of at the moment, but we wanted to just try and set out, as a kind of prelude to the case study research, some of the things that we think are really important in terms of getting value from data. So the first is that councils who are doing really good data work tend to take a problem-orientated approach to working with data. So they don't see data as in and of itself useful, but they see using data analysis as a way of testing hypotheses or as investigating, interrogating problems that need to be solved. They integrate data into a kind of data warehouse environment, which enables much deeper levels of analysis and use. So linking together data creates a fuller view of issues and individuals, which makes problem solving and pattern spotting much easier. They enable data sharing through the use of use-case-orientated information governance protocols. So we found that information sharing is reliably one of the big problems and challenges that everyone working in local government kind of data use will encounter. But we found that being very specific about the circumstances and purposes for which you might want to use data in advance and then agreeing information sharing protocols on the basis of those can alleviate some, if not all, of those issues. They have support for the better use of data from the top of the organisation. So senior managers and politicians can create a data-orientated culture through asking for data analysis as part of the decisions that they have to make. They invest in data science capacity needed to perform analysis and integrate large data sets. So we saw that data work increasingly requires skill sets that are not often or not typically found in local government to do with data science or with programming. And we see successful projects usually invest in either developing those skills in-house or in partnerships that can bring them in from the outside. They take an agile approach to working with data, rapidly prototyping, testing, and iterating as they go. And finally, they ensure that the soft and hard infrastructure that they have enables people to perform analytics and to store data in a kind of sensible way. And so while it may sound obvious, without high-speed broadband and good quality servers, data storage options, the right software, these kind of approaches can be really hindered. So that's the kind of discussion paper, and that's coming out at the end of this week. And that set the scene for our case studies, which is what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, and what this research workshop is mainly focused on. So at the beginning of the project, we wanted to choose a range of case studies that represented both issues that are really important to local authorities, so issues that can consume lots of your budgets, that are going to be worrying members and senior managers alike, and for which there is a desperate need for innovation and transformation. So we chose four main areas: children and families, adult social care and health, economic growth, within which we include smart cities and places, and then finally public service transformation and open data. So they're the four themes across which we wanted to choose case studies. And then the final 8 we selected were Manchester, who you're going to hear later from, Newcastle, where we looked at a very specific project which tries to support case management for social workers through data-oriented segmentation of their population, and then bringing data analysts to work alongside social workers for case management. In adult social care and health, we have a case study from Kent, who again we'll be hearing from later on today. And then the final, slightly elusive 8th case study, which we're hoping will be Suffolk County Council. Then in smart cities and economic growth, we have Bristol, who are again presenting, and Birmingham City Council, where we've been looking at their smart city programme and its wider digital Birmingham strategy. And then finally, in public service transformation, we have Leeds, who are presenting as well, and then the London Borough of Camden, where a range of new kind of bits of software and technology have helped them to integrate lots of back office processes, as well as to provide an open data portal, which not just increases transparency and supports kind of local data entrepreneurs, but also reduces some of the resource requirements, for instance, through things like FOI requests. So the methodology that we developed for this research was kind of five stages. We wanted to understand how councils were using the data, so the key use cases in each of these case studies. We wanted to ask them about the critical success factors for their projects and their programme. We wanted to develop the idea of data maturity and a data maturity model. So what we're trying to do with the case studies is to understand when these councils were starting out on their programmes, what was their level of data maturity? Because we think that's really useful for when the rest of the sector is looking at these case studies, for them to be able to understand whether or not the case studies required kind of lots and lots of prior data-oriented work to get them into a position where they could undertake this work. So we wanted to kind of understand where they were in that journey. And as a kind of aside, one of the documents that you'll find on your table is a data maturity framework, which we've basically borrowed from another organisation. But what we wanted to do is kind of show that to people in case, because it's not specifically aimed at local government. And what we found was that there wasn't a data maturity framework that's aimed at local government yet. And so what we want is, if people have the time, to have a look at that and to see whether or not there are kind of any elements of it which are useful for you and any elements of it that aren't. And then as we go through the research, we'll be sharing our thinking on a data maturity framework as we go along, and we hope to be able to share with you, following this workshop, a version of that we'll be making for local government. Finally, Fourth, we wanted to look at the value case. So we wanted to look at the impact that these programs have had, the ways in which they've benefited the local authority, both in terms of financial savings, but also in terms of increased efficiency and productivity, and also improved outcomes for their communities and their residents. And then finally, we wanted to look at the kind of replicability of these projects. So we wanted to understand whether the case studies we've looked at are really only possible in the specific contexts of the case study areas, or whether or not there's potential for other areas to try and realise the same kind of value and benefits as our case studies. Part of what we'll be discussing later is the typical barriers to dealing with data, and we're really keen to make sure that when we have those discussions and when we feed that into our report, that we're able to address the full range of barriers that local authorities encounter. So what I thought I'd do is just flag up some of the main barriers and challenges that we wanted to investigate in this research, so that when we get to the end and we have the discussions, people can raise any other issues that they commonly come up against, but which aren't on this list. So just to quickly run through them: information governance and information sharing, data integration, which includes issues about data quality, accessibility, and also standards. We wanted to look at hardware and software limitations. We wanted to look at the kind of internal culture of an organisation, so the kind of mindset that they have towards data use and the sort of general appetite towards using data for decision-making in the organisation. We wanted to look at the presence of data skills in the organisation, the financial resource constraints, which may impact upon your ability to do more data work, the organisational structure, so where data science or data analytics teams are located in an organisation, and whether that has an impact on their influence and their prominence in terms of transformation projects. The kind of attitude from senior leadership, so whether there's buy-in from senior managers and politicians, and then finally this idea of data maturity. So there are some of the barriers and challenges we considered. If there are others that you think we should have done, we can discuss those in the workshop later. And then just finally, before moving on and handing over to our case studies, I just thought I'd go through some of the kind of headline findings from the research so far. So this is research I've been doing over the last 6 weeks or so. We haven't had time to go away yet and fully analyse all of our research, but these are some of the things that have kind of stood out most immediately from the interviews and the document review that we've been doing. So firstly, and this probably come as no great surprise, but kind of leadership has been confirmed as probably the single most influential factor in data work in local authorities. So that's both from an officer side and from politicians. We found that information governance is certainly a real and a difficult challenge, but that it can be worked around, and that often some of the main problems are cultural rather than to do with legislation or legal issues. Data quality, again, is always an issue that crops up and will always have to be dealt with, but the kind of feedback we got from the case studies was probably the best way to deal with data quality is really just to try and use the data, because by doing that, you flush out a lot of the issues and a lot of the quality problems, and also it puts people in a position where they feel kind of more responsible for fixing data quality issues for the individual data sets that they hold. We found that all of the data projects have demonstrated really significant benefits, both for internally within the council and also in terms of kind of benefits for community and residents. But that also it's quite hard, particularly with some of the case studies we've looked at, which have been quite recent. It's quite hard to actually draw a really clear picture of financial savings. It's not to say that they're not there, but just that it's been quite difficult with more recent projects to make that case. Finally, next we found that new software does offer significant advances in terms of the ease with which you can do data analysis, but that in many cases we've seen that real benefits can be gained through using much more basic software such as Excel, and often from data sets that have been held by local authorities for some time. And then finally, in terms of creating a kind of data-oriented culture within organisations, the case studies have suggested that the best way of doing that is through really trying to understand the jobs that people are doing and the ways in which data can support those people to do their jobs better. And through having tools and tangible examples of data supporting those things, anyone who may be skeptical about data finds it much harder to be skeptical once they've seen it making a tangible improvement in terms of their job and the work that they do. So this is the final slide from me before we hand over to hear more from the case studies. But these are the questions that we'd like to discuss in the workshop element of today, later on this afternoon. So we've got about 45 minutes for this, and what we'd like is for each table to try and discuss 2, and if you have time, more of the questions that we have here. So one of the first question is about the key messages from the case studies to take forward in your local authorities. So what we want to know is what from the things that you've heard today do you think would resonate most with your leaders, service managers, frontline staff, and data analysts or data managers within your authority? What do you think would be the most compelling findings or examples that you've heard of today, and what really makes the case? Secondly, we want to understand the main ways in which better data use can help you guys to innovate, transform services, and improve people's lives. So at this point, we might want to consider the benefits to the local authority, to partners, to businesses, and to residents. Thirdly, we want to talk about the barriers to better data use, and which of these you think is the most important, or which are the most important to address. And as I mentioned, any that you think are important, but which we've missed off so far. And then finally, the question is about how Nesta and the LGA, with the remaining research that we have and any other programs that we might take on, the work that we can do to support councils to make better use of their data. So they're the questions. You should have copies of those on your table, and we've been moving on to those at about 2:45. Yep. Okay. So we're going to move over now into the presentations, and the first one we have is from Catherine Rooney from Bristol, who's going to be talking to us about open data and their smart city programme.